Welcome, everyone. I'm RJ Jennings, a part of our team here at Fixing, and welcome those of you who join us monthly on this call, and those of you who are new. We are fortunate to have our monthly gathering and the ability to bring in voices from around the country that help us begin to expand and grow and share information that we hope will help our journey and those of you in our community. So here at Fixing, we have been together for 4.5+ years of moving forward, and what I think aligns with tonight is that we are searching for accountability for our community, a connection to our working with our sheriff's department, and ensuring that everyone has a voice and is connected. We are happy that we have had a chance to meet with our new sheriff and looking forward to working with them and building a strong relationship. So, love having you all here. And our focus is to move this toward of obtaining a permanent IG in our community. And so we welcome anyone who can help us, who would like to volunteer and join us in this endeavor. So thank you for being here, and I'm looking forward to hearing our guest speaker this evening. Thank you. I will pass it over to Nancy.
Thank you, RJ. And I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Amaris Leon. She is the Director of Local Campaigns and Advocacy at Sheriff Accountability Action. She's a U.S. Supreme Court barred attorney and a national electoral strategist. Amaris specializes in constitutional office elections. Sheriff is a constitutional office and decarceral policy. Previously, she was with the Working Families Party, and in fact, that's how we met her, through our board member, James Coleman, who's also with the Working Families Party. He was the former mayor of South San Francisco last year. She's led criminal justice initiatives, including issue campaigns and local coalition building around district attorney, judicial, and sheriff election races. Amaris is a former foster youth, and she brings both deep legal expertise and lived experience to her work, driving her commitment to grassroots organizing and building political power for marginalized communities. Welcome, Amaris.
Thank you so much for having me. Also, you made me sound way cooler than I am, so thank you for that. And it's really nice to meet everybody here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being interested in the power of the Sheriff's Office, the accountability work that goes into it. Thank you to Captain Allen for being here. It's really what being a part of the community looks like. And so thank you. Tonight, we're going to go through briefly a couple of different buckets of the power of the sheriff's office, where they wield it. It's not just in the criminal justice field. There's a democracy component to it. There are people who are eligible to vote in jails that don't have access to the ballot. Post 2020 elections, a lot of sheriffs across the country joined the Stop the Steal rally and threatened to confiscate voter boxes and voter rolls. It's happening in Georgia as we speak. And also at the height of the moment, which is the focus of our presentation. But if you have questions beyond what is happening with the federal overreach, with ICE infiltrating our community, please feel free to ask any kind of questions, whether it's dealing with jail deaths, reducing mass incarceration, public health issues, ballot measures, nuts and bolts campaign work. But I did want to preface that a big chunk of our focus tonight, given what's happening in the murders in Minneapolis, is going to be on how sheriffs can either advance ICE's prerogative or help protect communities against it. Next slide. Or if you want to put the slides up. Who we are and what we do. We are the only national organization that is committed to tackling the over 3,000 sheriff offices that exist across the country. As Nancy mentioned at the beginning, sheriffs are a constitutional office in 48 of our 50 states. And what that means is the position itself is written into 48 state constitutions. So for any of my abolitionists in the room who are like, I don't, why are you doing this work? I asked myself the same thing when I came onto WFP, and my initial answer was because my boss told me to. And then that answer eventually evolved because I realized that these offices were going nowhere fast, but real harm was happening. When I was in law school, I also served as a volunteer guardian at Lightem. One of my kids was in a juvie center, and I had to be the one to call his family and let them know that he was put in solitary confinement because he had been sexually assaulted by a guard. So like holding that those real harms happen daily, I couldn't sit by and say, well, I'm not going to get involved in this work because I don't think the sheriff's office should exist. And so we have the opportunity to put people in office who are committed to harm reduction policies, to hold local campaign pressure campaigns, ballot measures, and even legislative lobbying that will change rules, policies, procedures, and laws to reduce harm in real time. You can go to the next slide. What we do, how that looks, we have really three strategy levers. I'm not sure why they're all listed as one, but three levers of strategy. The first is testing local approaches and accountability and alternative models. What that looks like, and which is the bread and butter of what I do, is local electoral work. We run independent expenditure campaigns in furtherance of harm reduction candidates. We also help out and run ballot initiatives. There was a ballot initiative that I worked on in Allentown, Pennsylvania a few years ago that if it had passed, it would have created an alternative response unit to certain kinds of 911 calls, primarily mental health, taking police out of mental health interactions and reducing risk of escalation. We also support local organizations in scaling up their electoral programs and models and bring in additional support and resources for that. The second lever that we pull, we have a national ending jail deaths campaign. What that looks like is we work with a cohort of directly impacted family members who have lost loved ones inside jails and in custody jail deaths. And the third is growing our movement. So that is events like this. We are, meeting and organizing new volunteers, organizers, journalists, movement lawyers. It's going to take people from all walks of life in different buckets, unifying in the same work and the same mission to see some real change. Next slide. What real-time impact looks like. So these are three of our sheriffs who we put in office in November of last year. Danny Seisler in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is my hometown, so this was a really unique opportunity to come back in this capacity and help a harm reduction sheriff candidate run and win. We were running against an incumbent who had entered into a 287G agreement, was a Trump supporter, and was being legally represented by Stephen Miller's law firm. We ousted him, putting in Danny Seisler, who is not only a military veteran, he's also a lawyer, and has spent his entire life working on emergency response models, both at the local and state level. He ran a really bold campaign, vowed to end the 287G agreement, and then did it within his first week with a big splash. We have Jackie Salvatore in Columbia County, New York. Jackie became the first woman of color to ever hold the sheriff's seat in that county for the state's history. Yes, the 287G agreement is the formal contract with ICE, and we'll get into what that looks like in a couple capacities. But in addition to being a history maker, Jackie ran a really bold campaign, taking a big stance against ICE. At the time, the current sheriff had a 287G agreement, not for the policing aspect, but inside the corrections facility. Not only did she end that, but her heart and her passion is in the public health sphere, so she is actively working on increasing civilian staff and infrastructure inside the jails to improve reentry and rehabilitation outcomes. And then locally, this is a little bit closer to home, Kenneth Binder from the new appointed sheriff in San Mateo. This was a really unique opportunity. as most of you might know, there was a untimely vacancy in the sheriff's office. The county board of supervisors was then put in a position to appoint a candidate. The hiring, which is how I came in contact with Nancy in this organization, our group was really invested in making sure that we put in another values-aligned sheriff. So I worked with Fixin San Mateo, the Working Families Party, and a couple other community leaders to help identify Mr. Binder. Talked to him before he applied, made sure that he was values aligned, and then we did what we do best, which is rallying and organizing support at the public hearings for his interview process. And for anyone who wasn't following, this is one of the most intense interview processes one could have. Everything was public, and we worked to put in community members to testify on behalf of, in favor of Kenneth Binder, to move the county commission to vote to appoint him over a couple other candidates. And so this was a win, not in the same way that we'd normally put sheriffs in, but nonetheless super important. And Ken is incredibly values aligned, has publicly stated that not only are his values with honoring the fact that San Mateo is a sanctuary city, but his policies will also reflect that as well. Next slide. Okay. And like I said, there's a lot of ways that sheriffs can either further public health or hinder it. Tonight, I'm mostly going to be focusing on the role that sheriffs play in immigration, and how we can either give in or stand up to our federal immigration. But there's a lot of ways. Sheriffs have the ability to do cite and release to reduce their jail populations. Not everyone who is arrested should or could be held inside a cell. Work release programs also not only give people the opportunity to continue earning money, be home with their families, develop a trade skill, but keeping bodies out of jails who should not be there, which reduces the risk of violence, sickness, illness, you name it. And so if any other questions pop up about that, please let me know. But sheriffs, now that we're in this time, play a central role in our mass deportation efforts. About 50%, that number was during Trump's first administration. Number has probably gone up slightly, but about 50% of deportations happen through our county jails, which are usually run by the sheriffs. This happens in a lot of different ways, both through formal and informal cooperation, like using detainer request. And for those of you who don't know what a detainer request is, it is an administrative order that requests the detainment of somebody who may be eligible for deportation. I'm going to say this a couple times. Detainer requests are civil arrest. There is no such thing as a criminal detainer warrant. By law, they are civil warrants, and which is the result of what we're seeing, who is being rounded up, arrested, targeted, harassed. And then also deputizing sheriffs through 287G agreements to act as federal agents, and then sharing information with ICE. Some sheriff's offices will share not only booking information, status information. I'm based in Sacramento. After Roe v. Wade was overturned in 2022, we got wind that our sheriff was sharing out-of-state license plate information with the corresponding states, which could have had a grave impact for anyone who is traveling to our state from Arizona or Nevada for abortion access. And this can happen with or without 287G agreements, which is why public information requests are super important and a great skill set to use. Next slide. Okay, what are we facing? So what does that look like? Obviously it is mass deportation. So it is, now here in California, it is illegal for ICE agents to make arrests at the courthouse, but in other states that is happening. So our courthouses, work sites, traffic stops. In North Carolina, we got wind that ICE agents were coming into schools, and also Texas. So these are, and what we're facing, loss of legal status, revoking student visas, We're seeing a huge attack on birthright citizenship, which is something that is really central to my existence, and then travel bans. We're also seeing an uptick in threatening through state statute the termination of sanctuary cities. One thing that I want to point out is that if you've got values aligned local law enforcement who believe that anyone who wants to be an American should be an American, any city can be a sanctuary city, regardless of what the state statutes say. You can go to the next slide. So what is a 287G agreement? It is a formal agreement that is entered with local law enforcement, usually the sheriff's office with ICE Immigration Customs. This can look like a couple different things. It could be all three of these things. It could be one of them. It can be a combination. So warrant service model, what is that? It trains and deputizes local law enforcement and authorizes them to ask questions, execute warrants, and that can look like through traffic stops, broken window policies. One of our coalition members, her son, who ultimately passed away in a jail under suspicious conditions, he was pulled over for tinted windows, and then through that broken window pullover, realized that he had a bench warrant out from 2011, was taken into custody, and then soon after died. So these are the ways in which sometimes people are becoming detained through 287G agreements and or their warrants, detainer warrants. The jail enforcement model, this is what we had in Columbia, or what existed in Columbia County before we put Jackie Salvatore in, which was the deputies of the sheriff's office were not out there policing, pulling people over and executing ICE warrants. But they were allowing ICE to come into their jails, whether that was for interrogation, to check on status, for exchange. This jail enforcement model also allows deputies to hold an incarcerated person up to 48 hours after a judge says that they are legally allowed to be released in order to give ICE time to come collect them. And this can happen and occur with or without formal 287G agreements. I do want to make that clear. And then the task force model, which is what we see that is the most visible of them, when deputies are trained not only to execute and honor warrants, but to go out and hunt people for who may or may not be eligible for them and bring them in. And this was probably one of the most dangerous models that we have. You can go to the next slide. All right, so how does that look? Like I said, formal or informal cooperation can happen. There's a lot of states or jurisdictions, sheriffs will say, I don't have a 287G agreement, but they are informally cooperating with ICE, like the above mentioned. Sharing information, sharing license plate information, holding a person up to 48 hours after a judge has already said that they can be released, notifying a police or an ICE agent before they're eligible to release. And all of these forms of cooperation, collaboration are voluntary, especially in the state of California. There are some states through statute and legislature that are trying to change the laws to bind sheriffs and local law enforcement's hands. But as of right now, the majority of the states do not have laws in place that require local law enforcement to cooperate with ICE agents. And so that is why it's so important for us to advocate to keeping our local resources, local personnel out of federal issues. You can go to the next slide. Great. Kind of already touched on this, what this looks like, notification policies. This can happen formally, informally, but making sure that we are, for organizations who endorse sheriff candidates, that could be something that you add into your endorsement questionnaires. That could be a policy that you hold your sheriffs and your county commissioners to when it comes to removing or appointing potential sheriffs. You can go to the next slide. jail access. As we mentioned, this can happen through contract or not contract, but ICE agents can only enter a jail with the approval of the sheriff or the warden's stamp. Without a signed judicial warrant, ICE agents cannot just come walk into jails uninvited. And so want to make that clear. The sheriff controls the domain of the jail in most counties. And so there's a lot of power to be had of whether or not they can even step foot into these offices. But that can look like interviewing individuals, conducting background checks, issuing detainers on the spot. There's a lot of times where people can be detained under the possibility that they might be eligible for deportation. And I wish that I were paraphrasing here. That is a legal phrase and term and policy in which people are being taken. And then coming in, doing interviews, verifying if they are or not eligible, and then issuing those warrants on the spot. And this can happen in any county, regardless if there's a 287G or not. You can go to the next slide. Information sharing, I kind of mentioned what was happening here in Sacramento where I am based. So that can look like license plate, that can look like secured communities, and then the national database. ICE had dumped 700,000 warrants into this database that local law enforcement has access to see. Now they can't pursue those warrants, but what they can do is, as names pop up in their jails, if their names are also on this 700,000 person database, they can call ICE up and notify them that those people are in their jails. You can go to the next slide. All right. So that is like all really horrible stuff. Now that I've brought the mood down, we're going to go ahead and take a look of how we can resist and what sheriffs have the power to do and to not do. The first thing in low-hanging fruit is ending 287G agreements if they exist. A lot of candidates that we are supporting last year and into this year are running on really bold campaigns to end 287Gs, to refrain from getting involved. In particular, in California, most counties don't have 287G agreements. However, we have something called SCAP. I would be a lookout in your county, but that is a federal grant program where jurisdictions can get federal funds to detain, report, turn over people of undocumented status. So here in California, 287Gs are not incredibly common, but SCAP is in certain counties, so that's something to keep an eye on. Ending those as well, or at least not cooperating with them. All information, including sharing data, fingerprints at booking. Sheriffs also don't have to ask what their citizenship status is when they come into custody, and they certainly don't have to report it. And then refusing to honor ICE warrants. As I mentioned earlier, ICE detainers are they're federal administrative warrants. They're not criminal, and they are not signed by a judge. The only kind of warrant that local law enforcement is legally required to honor are warrants that are signed by a judge. So even if I showed up to the jail and said, I have a detainer warrant for this person, a sheriff can say, I am not letting you in my jail. I am not turning this person over. I have no legal obligation to honor your federal administrative warrant. And that's a lot of power to be had. You can go to the next slide. And then the last thing, or the last couple, we are in really unprecedented times. New legal case law theories are actively, as we speak, being developed as ICE is coming into our communities, harassing people, terrorizing them, and frankly, going outside of the bounds of what their scope of duties is legally described as. That being said, can local law enforcement arrest ICE? Generally, the answer to that question is no. Federal authority is always put above state law. However, if ICE agents are acting outside of their federal authority or abusing power or violating a state law in furtherance of that, local law enforcement does have the right and the authority to make those kinds of arrests for things like murder, harassment. You know, here in California, Keith Porter was murdered by an off-duty police agent. You know, that is a state violation of murder. You know, there's also ways of like developing exceptions. So ICE agents can also face arrest and persecution for crimes that fall outside of those duties. That's really important. There's some case law, not a lot, but like I said, it's continuing to develop. There is a judge who came out of Illinois that created this precedent. If ICE is breaking state laws, they can be arrested, prosecuted, charged. Larry Krasner, who's the district attorney in Philly, had already made that statement and made it clear that he will, sua sponte, on his own, charge ICE agents for any state law violation. So there's a lot of power that we can test. And my favorite quote from any elected official is Larry Krasner, who said, "Fuck around and find out." So we're at a place where we can really push the Overton window and test our bounds of how law enforcement can step in and protect its community members. You can go to the next slide. Things that we can demand. We can demand that sheriffs prohibit voluntary information sharing or record sharing with ICE, prohibiting deputies and jail staff from cooperating or asking about citizenship status, refusing ICE access into the jail without a judicial warrant, building community coalition to advise non-citizens of their rights, building relationship with immigration attorneys who are willing to come into the jails and consult people who are up for, who are being presented with plea deals, to make sure that they're fully aware of how that any plea deal that they may or may not take would have implications on their status. You know, encourage sheriff's associations to oppose federal immigration enforcement through legislative laws, through local ordinances, and then also just straight up refusal to participate. Like I said, you know, when ICE raids come in, they often need the support of local law enforcement to facilitate that raid, whether it is, you know, actually helping execute the raid, whether it is barricading the sidewalks and the perimeters of the raid site. None of that is legally required to be provided by local law enforcement. So local law enforcement can say federal issue, federal resources, and stay out of it. And then, you know, like we had mentioned at the last slide, making arrests when ICE agents are in violation of state law and or acting outside of the scope of what their federal and official duties are. And these are all very fair legal demands that we can make of our sheriffs and hold them accountable to. You can go to the next slide. What can we do? There's a lot of different levers of activism and what that looks like. There's direct action work that is, it has to be planned ahead of time. It has to be highly organized. You have to have safety plans, but anything to back up, distress, prolong, either raids, detainers, making immigration resources or a more expensive process. And then also showing up to your county commission meetings, putting their feet to the fire to hold sheriffs accountable. Here in California, county commissioners do have the authority to remove sheriffs for cause. And so making sure that you are closing that loop of the symbiotic relationship of your local government. Attend and give Know Your Rights trainings. If you are a movement lawyer, you host Know Your Rights trainings, making sure that people understand not only what the implications of when you are pulled over by cops or ICE, but also what your rights are in protest as well. And then advocating for system changes, specifically, forcing sheriffs to resign through community pressure campaigns, through ballot measures that create oversight into civilian oversight board. There's actually a movement in Riverside County, California, that would create a civilian oversight board over the sheriff's office with subpoena power. That is super crucial. As some of you may know, Chad Bianco is the sheriff of Riverside. Right now, he's also running for governor on the Republican ticket, and horrible. But we're accounting for about one jail death a week inside the Riverside jail. And between San Bernardino and Riverside, about 19% of all in custody deaths are happening between those two counties. And the county commission has refused to implement a civilian review board. And so now there's a ballot measure to implement it. So that's a couple other ways, right? Building relationships with county commissioners, asking them to implement some oversight and accountability measures. And if that all fails, the most direct form of advocacy and democracy is ballot work. And you can go to the next slide. Unless that's it. Okay, I think that might be it. All right. I will stop talking. I would love to answer questions. This is my favorite part.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for your presentation. A lot of great information. And I know, of course, because of what's going on in the country, what's happening with ICE and local law enforcement is very much in the forefront of everyone's mind. And it feels very frustrating. And one of the questions is about law enforcement being able to arrest federal agents if they think they've broken a law. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, the ICE people are masked. They seem to be very aggressive. What we've seen seems clearer to the community than, I guess, to the federal administration about what is happening. But in what instances can local law enforcement intervene and say that federal agent broke a law and I'm going to arrest them?
Mm-hmm. Like I said, this is developing case law as we speak, so not a whole lot of precedents, which for a nerd like me makes me really excited because we can really, really test the bounds of that. And so some of the most obvious answers, that come to mind, I'll kind of touch on the murder of Alex Peretti. That one weighs particularly heavy on me because nothing that he did was out of, there was no laws broken on his behalf. He was legally licensed to carry a gun. In Minneapolis, you are allowed to conceal carry. So he had a legally authorized gun on his person. You are also allowed to film ICE agents, which was what he was doing on his phone. If you are in public, you are allowed to film. There is no expectation of privacy. He was detained. He was stripped of his gun. And after they had possession of the gun, they shot him execution style. That is murder. That is false imprisonment. That is, confiscation of private property. There were a handful of things that if I really wanted to test in court, I would feel comfortable doing without running the risk of being frivolous. If there was any local law enforcement on the ground there, they could have made an arrest for murder. And whether or not that would be held up in court, who knows? But I think that doesn't matter at this point. I think that taking the stance on principle is what matters right now, and then let the rest of it be sorted out in court.
Okay, thank you. And so does your group, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Does your group have a policy position in support of independent sheriff oversight? And if you do, what do you think are the best practices for oversight? Is it inspector general a good idea? Do they need to have subpoena power? Mm-hmm. What is your group's thoughts?
Yes, so we have on a national level, we have a policy demand document, and that includes independent oversight of jails and sheriffs. Sheriffs have wide discretion in their powers that largely go unchecked. California, we're a little bit different in the sense that the county commissioners, in theory, have a little bit of oversight power over the sheriff's office, but that's pretty uncommon when you look across the country. And even here in California, right? There's where we do have a little bit of that control mechanism through the county board. I think that a civilian oversight is important, right? That could, and we've seen a couple different models. Sometimes through statute, and oversight has to be made up of a certain percentage of barred attorneys versus layperson. There can be any kind of combination. Subpoena power is what gives oversight boards teeth. So I think that is a crucial component of it. Like the ballot initiative that's being proposed in Riverside right now that they're trying to qualify for the ballot. It is a combination. It is a civilian oversight board with subpoena power that has a mechanism where it is there's a liaison relationship with the county attorney. So the county attorney can also, the inspector general can get the findings of the oversight board. In a lot of instances where you've got an oversight board for, like I went to law school in Orlando, they had a civilian oversight board over the sheriff's office. It really had no teeth. They didn't have subpoena power, and their reports, their findings were very easily buried by county commission. And so I think that having subpoena power and a liaison relationship with the local attorney's office is what gives that teeth. And they are necessary. In Riverside and a handful of counties across the country, the sheriff and the coroner have been collapsed into one role. So the sheriff is the coroner. That breeds an immense opportunity for conflict when you are investigating deaths that have happened under your jail and your personnel.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. So, excuse me, there's a question about the sheriff's relationships and how they work with people who have mental illness. And does your group have a recommendation about what kinds of teams should work with folks with mental illness who might cause harm to themselves and to others? And, here in San Mateo County, we have had a few instances of people having mental health episodes being killed by the sheriff's department. And so, and oftentimes, if the sheriff is the law enforcement agency for a city, that's who's going first. So does your group have any thoughts about how to best work with the sheriff on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, there is no silver bullet, and different responses or different kinds of calls and different issues require different kinds of responses. Not all people, and I'll start with the lowest and then work up to the most extreme. Not all people who are having mental health crises are of danger to others, or perhaps even themselves. There's a handful of jurisdictions across the country where they have alternative response units that are based in de-escalation practices and mental health services. There's also co-responder models in certain jurisdictions. That is when a social worker who is trained in street de-escalation pairs up and responds to calls with a deputy or local law enforcement officer. There's models where it's a paramedic or a first responder with a deputy or local law enforcement. And I think that the kind of response that's required depends on the kind of call that you are getting. In addition to that, our jails throughout the country, this is like we have such a horrible response to people who need mental health services, and we have ignored it. We have not built systems that properly care for the different needs of people, and then we have thrown all of that responsibility at sheriffs and expect them to fix it, to deal with it, and it's putting everybody in an unfair, ill-equipped position. And so co-responder models are, and that can look like a lot of different things, as I had just mentioned.
Right.
Having sheriffs who will increase the amount of civilian staff that they have inside their jails. And by civilian staff, I mean social workers, mental health care professionals, uh, people who are trained in restorative justice practices, um, and even things like bringing in programs, whether it is opportunity for education, work training, therapy. In San Quentin, they have a couple different programs, including the Prison Yoga Project, from the obvious solutions that we find to some of the more creative ones that reduce violence. And what causes violence? It is a cycle of people who are harmed, who have been harmed, and have not been given the tools to rectify that. 98% of people who are sitting in our jails and prisons have already been victims themselves of violent crime. And that creates and perpetuates cycles of shame, isolation, and those all feed into harm. And it's a cycle that we need to break, and it is requires a lot of different levers that right now we only hold one agency responsible for.
Thank you. And speaking of jails, and here in San Mateo County, as in many places, the sheriff does run our county jail. And we've been asked questions about the deputies in the jail, working in the jail, and wondering if you all can say anything about best practices in terms of management in the jail to reduce violence towards the incarcerated people, but also reducing violence toward the deputies. Are
Mm-hmm.
there any best practices to keep everybody safer?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of ways to reduce violence. Some of them I mentioned when you give people tools to deal with not only the harm that has happened to them, but what they have caused to others. That reduces violence. When you give people opportunity for meaningful rehabilitation or setting them up for actual success in reentry, that also reduces the likelihood that someone is going to be violent or reoffend. Crime happens, like I mentioned, through isolation, shame, and whether it's a real or perceived lack of opportunity. Training with deputies, de-escalation training, unconscious bias trainings, making sure that you have properly equipped people in the jails who are experienced with things like suicide watch, de-escalation practices when it comes to interpersonal conflict between guards, other residents, among other residents, and then supervision. And by supervision, I don't mean necessarily the surveillance aspect of it, but there's a sheriff race that we're working on in North Carolina. There was a pretty egregious jail death that happened as a result of inmates getting into it with each other. And then this gentleman unfortunately passed away from some cardiac complications that had already existed, but the fight exacerbated. He was left alone, unattended in his cell for hours until they found him, and it was already too late at that point. The problem here is in that jail in particular, jail auditors over the course of 5 years had repeatedly told the sheriff in written reports highlighting some really systemic issues, broken two-way intercom systems, broken cameras that were covered up, physically not being able to see inside the jail cells because people were hanging sheets over it, and just like an utter neglect that was bordering on malfeasance. And so I think, again, there's a couple actual training tools that can equip deputies, training staff, and also other incarcerated people that reduce violence. But I also think it's breaking down these prejudices, these biases. You've got to have people in the jail that not only care about the safety and health of people outside the jail, but people inside the jail too.
Thank you. And what guidance would you or your organization offer to our new sheriff and his office about preventing jail deaths?
I think there's a lot of different ways. No silver bullet. One, increasing opportunity for education, rehabilitation, bringing in restorative justice practices, mental health services, reducing the size of the population. Like I said, not everyone who is arrested needs to be held in jail. There is ways to make sure that people come to account when it is their arraignment date without being held. You can do cite and release. You can do ankle monitoring. There are work release programs as well. And also keep in mind, most people who are sitting in their jails are pre-trial, so have not actually been convicted. Um, the list goes on. Those are the couple that are coming to mind. But anything that is going to reduce shame, isolation, and real or perceived lack of opportunity for what comes next are the three buckets that I think when those needs are met, it reduces the need, desire, or the perceived opportunity to commit harm.
Thank you. When our county passed the ballot measure that allowed them to remove the former sheriff, they included a provision that would sunset at the end of 2028, which was when her term would have ended.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that sort of power with the board should be permanent, or do you think this is an effective form of accountability for sheriffs?
Yeah, I do think that is an effective board or mode of accountability. I think that you know reform and public safety does not happen in a vacuum. And I will die. Right now, my focus is sheriff work because that is the mission of our organization. But it's not just good enough to have a harm reduction sheriff. You need a harm reduction mayor. You need a harm reduction county commission, city council, DAs, all working for the same value system. And so one thing I think that generally speaking, more accountability levers outside of every 4 years an election is good. I think that in conservative counties, that's something that you want to make sure that you are keeping an eye on. If, sheriffs who are actually trying to further harm reduction tactics and policies are being removed, quote unquote, for cause because it doesn't go along with the conservative agenda is a possibility. But just like our ethos, like harm is going to happen when you have human beings and conflict arises, and none of everyone should be in therapy. None of us are given proper tools to deal with conflict interpersonally. Think like bad things happen, but I think that it's you don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And so the idea of having an elected board being able to remove sheriffs for cause is another positive lever. I think having the civilian oversight board is a positive lever. I think having legislators in office who are going to refrain from changing state statutes to tie law enforcement's hands and force them to cooperate with ICE is a good thing. I think that there are a lot of different lanes that we can set up checks and balances.
Great. Thank you so very much for your presentation and for answering all these really wonderful questions. It is quite an important topic, and I look forward to having you back again another time and see if we've moved forward. Thank you. And now I will turn it over to Nancy.
Thank you. And thank you, Amaris and Trina, for taking the questions. This was really important. And I know you focus a lot on immigration, which is not always as hot a topic as it is, but that has been the biggest thing that we're hearing from communities around the country. So thank you for kind of outlining those issues. So I'm executive director of Fixin San Mateo County. If you're new to us, we are a volunteer-run organization. Started about 4.5 years ago, and we're all about just trying to have transparency, accountability, and justice with regard to public safety. So community engagement, we're really glad the supervisors did create an advisory commission, the Independent Civilian Advisory Commission on the Sheriff's Office, almost a couple of years now. And they meet every month. They're focusing on three areas. One is transparency, for which they have recommended an inspector general with subpoena power to support transparency. They're working on improving communication between people who are incarcerated and their families, for which one of the things they're looking at is the fact that right now people can't get physical mail, they can't get birthday cards and such from their families. And the third thing they're looking at is focusing on is community engagement. And so a lot of community members have been active and they've taken into account our questions and used those in kind of developing their work plan. And that's been real helpful. Fixin San Mateo County is supported by 35 or more organizations, the Coalition for Safer San Mateo County. And our goal this year is to get a permanent inspector general, not just what they have now, which is if there's a real crisis, they bring in someone ad hoc, but a long-term permanent person, really that would have a focus on the systems and being proactive. If you bring in someone at the time of a crisis, and they did that, the Board of Supervisors did that, but it doesn't help fix things structurally. Right now, one of the concerns people have had is that citizen complaints, civilian complaints, resident complaints go to the sheriff's office. And we've had people come to us and say, well, we don't want to talk to the sheriff because they're the ones I'm complaining about. So an inspector general is usually the one in the county that takes those complaints on a neutral basis. They also look at incidents. This includes deaths in custody. It includes allegations of excessive force. And the advantage there is that they can bring an outsider's perspective. We've talked about deaths in custody here, and everyone seems to agree that part of the problem is more than half the people in the jail have a mental health condition, a substance abuse condition, or both. And the jail isn't set up to treat that. It's not a clinical setting. We need more community services. We need more diversion. And so an inspector general can look at it not the way they look at it now, which is the district attorney and gets together with the sheriff and says, did anyone commit a crime to cause this person to die in jail? That's not the question. The question is, how can we prevent deaths in jail on an ongoing basis? So we're glad we have a new sheriff, and he has said to this ICAC commission at his first meeting there, because he's only been here 2 months, people. He said we're probably all 80% in agreement on things, and we want to look at those things that we agree on. Fixin and Silicon Valley Debug and members of our coalition, Faith and Peninsula Solidarity Cohort faith leaders have been meeting regularly with the jail captain to improve religious services in the jail, and they've come a long way in that. They've come not quite halfway, but made great progress, and the volunteer ministers are really pleased with that. So we want the same thing, I think, as our sheriff and their team wants, which is a smoothly running sheriff's office, adequately staffed. The jail's been understaffed for years, and that also, as you had said, is part of the problem with jail deaths. Adequately resourced and basically adequately trained. So I think we all agree on that. And our hope is that an inspector general could be proactive in helping us address some of the concerns. The National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement basically says oversight is something you do with the sheriff, not to the sheriff, and otherwise it doesn't work. So hopefully we can all work together over the next coming year to come to an agreement on what makes sense to really increase transparency and accountability. And I think Inspector General is a good step in that direction, as ICAC was a good step in that direction. So that's our goal this year, working with the Board of Supervisors to pass and create a position or a function of ongoing Inspector General, and working with the sheriff to help achieve goals that are priorities both for the community and for the sheriff's office, of which there's a lot. So thank you all for coming. And on that note, I'm going to turn it back over to Trina for telling us what we can do about it.
Yeah. Thank you, thank you. And I always forget to introduce myself, but I'm Trina Patton, and I am the outreach group lead for Fixin San Mateo County. And so I just have a few announcements. The information will be in the chat in case you're interested, but different ways that you can be involved with this topic. Coming up on Thursday, February 12th, next week in downtown Redwood City, in front of the library, is a multi-faith Valentine's Solidarity Vigil to grieve the lives lost to ICE action and detention. That again is at Thursday, February 12th at 7 o'clock in downtown Redwood City. The following Tuesday, February 17th, is Fixin's monthly happy hour. Starts at 4:30 to 6:30, and we will be at Das Beer House in Redwood City, which is on Middlefield Road. And you don't have to RSVP, just drop by. Then we get into March. On Monday, March 2nd, from 4 to 7, the BSCC, which is the Board of State and Community Community Corrections, will be hosting a listening section by Zoom, and it is the In Custody Death Review Division is holding this listening session. The director, Allison Gantner, was a speaker at this monthly meeting last year. And the listening section is organized in collaboration with many community partners. It's a good way to be able to hear about what's going on and to provide feedback as well. So that is Monday, March 2nd, 4 to 7. It will be on Zoom, and the Zoom link is in the chat. And then Tuesday, March 3rd at 7 p.m. is our monthly meeting for Fixin. And we will have the pleasure of hearing from our new sheriff, Kenneth Bender, as well as the undersheriff, Chris Young. And they're going to talk about modern-minded policing culture. So please do sign up to attend that training as well. And then on Wednesday, March 4th, 6:30 to 8:30, it is the monthly ICAC meeting. It is held in person, 500 County Center in the Manzanita Room in downtown Redwood City, or on Zoom.